Now read this.
Hello and welcome back to Now Read This, the Chronicles of Prydain, Book 4, Taran Wanderer, Chapter 5, A Judgment. Taran scrambled down the rocks jutting beside the high cascade. In a pool hammered into white spray, he could hardly make out Smoit's burly form, spinning in the eddies. Heedless of the pounding water, Taran pitched through the falls and sprang into the pool. He groped for Smoit's belt and seized it at last. Battling the whirlpool and nearly drowning himself with his own efforts, Taran painfully strove to drag the half-conscious king into the shallows. Smoit was bleeding heavily from the forehead, and his ruddy face had gone chalky pale. Taran tugged at the king's waterlogged bulk, hauling him safely from the rolling waters. In another moment, Gurgi and Fluda were beside him, helping to drag the king ashore. Smoit, like a beached whale, collapsed on the bank. Gurgi, moaning anxiously, loosened the king's garments, while Taran and the bard hastily saw to Smoit's injuries.
"He can count himself lucky he's only cracked his skull and half his ribs," Fluda said. "Another man would have been snapped in two. But we're in a fine pickle," he added under his breath to Taran, glancing at the warriors who had come to gather near the unconscious Smoit. "He'll not lay Gast or Gorion by the heels now. He needs more healing than we can give. We'd best take him to Kirkadan."
Taran shook his head. He remembered Smoit's words about the neighbouring Cantrev lords who would seize the opportunity to attack. It was in his mind, too, that finding Cornillo could best bring Gast and Gorion to terms and thus end their battle. But his thoughts were as tangled as Ordu's weaving, and he fervently wished himself in the place of Smoit, whose unconsciousness at that moment seemed a most enviable state. "Eodan's farmhold is closer," Taran said. "We'll bring him there, and Gurgi shall stay with him. You and I must seek out Gast and Gorion, and do what we can to stop their quarrel. As for Cornillo and the herd, I doubt we may hope to find them." The companions, tearing their cloaks into strips, set about binding up Smoit's wounds. The king's eyelids fluttered, and he groaned loudly.
"Give me to eat," gasped Smoit. "I may be half drowned, but I'll not be half starved."
He put a hand on Taran's shoulder.
Good lad, you've saved my life. Another moment and I'd have been beaten into a pudding. Claim any favour, it is yours."
"I ask none," Taran replied, knotting the bandages around Smoit's huge chest. "Alas," he murmured, "what I most want, none can grant."
"No matter," panted Smoit. "What you wish of me, you shall have."
"Sire, you cannot travel far," Taran began as Smoit tried painfully to climb to his feet. "Give us leave to ride with your warriors, and—" "Kind master, here!" Gurgi called excitedly. "Here with listenings!" Leanne, too, had caught some sound, for her ears cupped forward and her whiskers twitched.
"It's my gizzard calling for meat and drink," cried Smoit. "Loud it must be, for I'm empty as a drum."
"No, no!" shouted Gurgi, seizing Taran's arm and drawing him past the trees along the riverside. "Gurgi hears no thrummings and drummings, but cooings and mooings." Leaning on the bard, Smoit stumbled after them. Gurgi had spoken the truth. The creature's sharp ears had not deceived him. Now Taran himself heard a faint lowing. Gurgi raced toward the sound. Beyond the trees, the land dipped into a shady dell watered by a streamlet. Taran cried aloud. There stood the herd, grazing calmly around Cornillo.
"My pulse!"
bellowed Smoit, so loudly that a dozen horned heads turned and stared as alarmed as if some strange new kind of bull had burst into their quiet pasture.
"Great Bellin!" cried Fluda. "Cornillo's led them all to safety. She's wiser than either of her masters."
Cornillo raised her head as Taran hurried to her side. She blew out her breath gently and rolled her eyes in look of long-suffering patience. Smoit, heedless of his grievous bruises, clapped his hands triumphantly and shouted at the top of his voice for his warriors. "Sire, let us drive the herd to Eodan's farm," Taran urged. "Your own hurts must be tended better than we've done."
"Drive them where you please, lad," answered Smoit. My body and bones, we have them now. That will fetch Gast and Gorion to me at a gallop.
He summoned 2 horsemen, commanding them to bear a message to the Cantor of Lords.
Tell those 2 troublemakers where I'll wait them, cried Smoit, and tell each to call truce, for his cows are found.
And Gurgi found them, shouted Gurgi, capering wildly. Yes, yes, bold, clever, sharp-eared Gurgi finds all that is lost. Oh, yes. He flung his hairy arms around himself and seemed close to bursting with pride and delight at his own deed. Oh, bards will sing of clever Gurgi with rantings and chantings. I'm sure they will, old friend, Taran said. You've found the herd, but don't forget we still have Gast and Gorion to deal with, and there's only one Cornillo. The cows were at first reluctant to quit the dell, but after much coaxing, Taran was able to lead Cornillo along the valley pathways towards Eodan's farm. The others followed her, lowing and tossing their horns. It was a strange procession that wended its way across the meadows and rolling hillocks. Smoit's warriors rode on either side of the herd, and the red-bearded king himself brandished a spear as if it were a drover's staff. Leanne padded after the cattle, alert for strays, and Gurgi perched proud as a shaggy rooster on Cornillo's back. When Eodan's hut came in sight, Taran galloped ahead, calling to the farmer, but he had no sooner dismounted when the door burst open, and he fell back surprised. Eodan stood with a rusted sword in his hand. Behind the farmer, Taran glimpsed Alarka weeping into her apron.
Is this how you repay kindness?
Eodan cried, recognizing Taran immediately. His eyes blazed as he pointed the ancient weapon at the approaching warband.
Do you come with them to spoil our land? Begone! It is already done.
How then? Taran stammered, shocked at these words from one he held to be a friend. I ride with King Smoit and his men. We seek peace between Gast and Gorion.
Does it matter whose warriors trampled my crops? Eodan flung back. What Gast has destroyed, Gorion has doubly destroyed, warring back and forth across my field till not a blade of wheat stands. Battle is their pride, but my farm is my life. Do they seek vengeance? I sought only a harvest.
In the weariness of despair, Eodan bowed his head and cast his sword to the ground. Taran stared in dismay at the field where Eodan had so painfully laboured. The hooves of steeds had churned the earth to mud, uprooting the young shoots which now lay torn to shreds. The harvest on which Eodan had staked his livelihood would never come, and Taran felt the farmer's heart break as if it were his own. Before he could speak, a troop of horsemen galloped from the woods edging the farm. Taran recognized Lord Gorion at their head. In another moment, Lord Gast and his riders appeared. Catching sight of his rival, the Cantor of Lords spurred his mount and galloped frantically to the cottage, flung himself out of the saddle, and with a furious shout raced toward Gorion.
Robber! Cried Gast. Do you mean to steal Cornillo from me again? Thief! Cried Gorion. I took what was mine to begin with. Liar! Roared Gast. Never was she yours. Insults and insolence! Roared Gorion, his face turning purple, his hands snatching for his sword. Be silent! Bellowed Smoit. He shook his battle-axe at the Cantor of Lords. Your king speaks. How dare you quarrel and insult each other, you pig-headed brawlers?
Smoit gestured to his warriors, who strode to seize Gast and Gorion. The riders of the 2 warbands cried out angrily and made to unsheathe their swords. For an instant, Taran feared another battle would rage then and there, but Smoit's warriors stood their ground, and the sight of the enraged king himself caused the horsemen to draw back submissively.
My dungeon will teach you to be good neighbours, cried Smoit. You'll stay there till you learn. As for Cornillo, I've split my skull, cracked my bones, and ridden to the edge of starvation this day, and so I claim her for myself. A prize of war, and small recompense it is for the vexation you've given me. Another day, and you'd have set the whole Cantor ablaze.
At this, Gast and Gorion both roared in furious protest, and Taran could no longer hold his tongue. He strode to the king's side. Sire, Even a lifetime in the dungeon will not raise 1 grain of wheat on a ruined field. Aedan has lost all he hoped to gain, 1 harvest to keep himself and his wife alive. You offered me a favour, Taran went on. I refused it then. Will you let me claim it now?
Ask what you please, my lad, replied Smoit. It is already given.
Taran hesitated a moment as he stepped forward and stood facing the Cantrev lords. Then he turned to Smoit. I ask you this, he said. Set Gast and Gorion free. While Smoit blinked in astonishment, Gorion, glimpsing Taran for the first time, exclaimed,
It's the pig keeper who cozened me out of my horse. I took him for a lout, but he asks a noble favour. Grant it, Smoit, he speaks wisdom.
Set them free, Taran continued, to labour beside Aedan and strive to mend what they have destroyed.
What? Cried Gast. I took him for a hero, but he's no more than a lout. How dare he ask Geth the Generous to delve in the ground like a mole, and for no reward? Impudence, impertinence, insolence, shouted Gorion. I'll not have a pig keeper pass judgment on Gorion the Valorous. Nor on Gast the Generous, exclaimed Gast.
Pass judgment on yourselves, then, Taran answered, picking up 2 handfuls of earth and torn shoots and holding them before the furious Cantrev lords. This is what remains of Aedan's livelihood. As well take a sword and slay him. Look on this, Lord Gorion, for there is more truth here than in your tales of giants and monsters. And this he treasured, Lord Gast, more than you treasure any of your possessions, and it was more truly his own, for he toiled to make it so. Gast and Gorion had fallen silent. The 2 rough Cantrev lords stared at the ground like sheepish boys. Aedan and his wife looked on without speaking.
The lad has a better head on his shoulders than I do, exclaimed Smoit, and his judgment is wiser. Kinder, too, for my choice would have been the dungeon, not the delving.
The Cantrev lords reluctantly nodded agreement. Taran turned to Smoit. The rest of my favour is this. Grant most where need is greatest. Do you claim Cornillo for your own? Sire, give her to Aedan.
Give up Cornillo, Smoit began, sputtering and choking. My prize of war.
He finally nodded his head.
So be it, lad.
Aedan shall keep her, Taran went on, and Gast and Gorion shall have her next calves.
What of my herd? Cried Gorion. And mine, cried Gast. They're so mixed together no man can tell his own from another.
Lord Gorion shall divide the herds in equal portions, Taran said.
He shall not, Lord Gast broke in. He'll give me all the scrawny ones and keep the fat for himself. It's I who'll divide them. Not so, shouted Gorion. You'll fob off none of your raw-boned creatures on me.
Lord Gorion shall divide the herds, Taran repeated, but Lord Gast shall be the first to choose his half.
Well said, Smoit burst out, roaring with laughter. My breathed blood, you have them there. Gorion divides and Gast chooses. Ho, ho, ho! It'll take 2 thieves to strike an honest bargain.
Aedan and Alaka had come to stand before Taran and King Smoit. Who you may truly be, I do not know, the farmer said to Taran, but you befriended me far better than I befriended you. Oh, wisdom of kindly master, cried Gurgi, as the Cantrev lords set about dividing their herds, and Smoit's warriors made ready to return to Caer-Cadawn. Gurgi finds cows, but only wise master knows what to do with them. If indeed I did rightly, Taran replied. Gast and Gorion will be waiting for Cornillo's calves. Gast said they were always twins. I only hope, he added with a grin, that she doesn't disappoint us. It was long after nightfall when the companions at last reached Caer-Cadawn. Fflewddur and Gurgi were too exhausted to do more than fling themselves onto their couches. Taran would gladly have followed them, but Smoit took his arm and drew him to the great hall.
Count your day well spent, my lad, cried Smoit. You've spared the Cantrev from a war, and me from being drummed into jelly. As for Gast and Gorion, how long they'll stay at peace with each other, I'll not guess. But you've taught me one thing. My dungeons are useless. My body and bones, I'll have them walled up directly. From this day, I'll try my hand at speaking instead of smiting. And yet, lad, Smoit went on, furrowing his brow, my wits are slow. I need no man to tell me that. I am easier in my mind when I have a blade in my hand. Will you return favour for favour? Stay with me in country of Cadifor.
Sire, Taran answered, I seek to learn who my kinsmen are. I cannot.
Kinsmen? Shouted Smoit, slapping his great girth. There's enough of me to make all the kinsmen you could want. Hear me well, he added, his voice quieter now. A widower I am, and childless. Do you yearn for parents? No less do I yearn for a son. When the horn of Gwyn the Hunter sounds for me, there shall be none to take my place, and none would I choose but you. Stay, lad, and you shall one day be king of Cadifor.
King of Cadifor? Taran cried. His heart leapt. What need to seek the mirror when he could offer Eilonwy a royal throne, the proudest gift he could ever lay at her feet? Taran, King of Cadifor. The words rang more sweetly in his ears than Taran, assistant pigkeeper. Yet suddenly his joy turned cold. While Eilonwy might honour his rank, could she respect him for abandoning his quest even before it had begun? Could he respect himself? For a long while Taran did not answer. Then with fond admiration he turned his eyes to Smoit. The honour you would give me, Taran began, there is nothing I would value more highly. Yes, I long to accept it. His voice faltered. Yet I would rather hold kinship by right of noble birth, not as a gift. It may be, he went on slowly, that in truth I am nobly born. If it should prove thus, then gladly I would rule Cadifor.
How then? Cried Smoit. My body and bones I'd rather see a wise pig-keeper on my throne than a blood prince who's a fool.
But there is this as well, Taran answered. It is in my heart to learn the truth about myself. I will not stop short of it. Were I to do so, who I truly am would forever be unknown, and through all my life I would feel a part of me lacking. At these words, Smoit's battle-scarred face fell with sadness, and regretfully he bowed his head. But after a moment he clapped Taran heartily on the back.
My breath, blood and beard, he cried, you've a will to chase the wild goose, will-o'-the-wisp, looking-glass, or whatever it may be, and I'll say no more to keep you from it. Seek it out, lad. Whether or not you find it, come back, and Cadifor will welcome you. But hasten, for if Gast and Gorion are ever at loggerheads again, I'll not vouch for how much of the Cantrev will be left.
Thus Taran, with Gurgi and Fludaflam, set off once more. In his secret heart, Taran cherished the hope he might return to Smoit's realm with proud tidings of his parentage. Yet he did not foresee how long it would be until he set foot in Cantrev Cadifor again. Hey, you want to buy something? You can check the description for my books and audiobooks. Thank you so much for watching, and don't forget to like and subscribe for more content.